My oldest child went through Walmart and she was just grabbing stuff and said, "Ooh, look at this. Ooh, look at that." Came home and I told my wife, I said, the key to happiness is finding something extra in the ordinary so that everything becomes extraordinary.
Today on First Person, you'll meet Shane Norman. It's impossible to put just one label on Shane describing what he does in life, but I think you'll enjoy meeting him today, and we'll begin the conversation in just a moment. The simple idea behind this weekly radio show is that we want you to meet people from all walks of life who are motivated in what they do by the love of God, who has changed them and redeemed them to live for His purposes. So each week you'll hear a different story as people share how they serve God. Our website has additional information at firstpersoninterview.com. There you can see the schedule of upcoming guests and browse back through the archive of past interviews. That's firstpersoninterview.com. Our guest today, Shane Norman, works at one of the nation's leading fundraising agencies for ministries. But Shane is also an entrepreneur in marketing, strategy, and social media with experience in the corporate media world. And on top of that, he's a pastor. Our recent conversation began when I asked him about his work.
So I work for Douglas Shawn Associates, leading fundraising marketing agency as the Chief Digital Officer and Senior Vice President.
Whoa, Chief Digital Officer. That sounds pretty intimidating.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Just last week I sat with a worldwide collection of Chief Digital Officers in London discussing digital transformation and disruption. And so I have an incredible opportunity to serve organizations with Douglas Shawn Associates.
What does a digital officer do?
And typically, by its definition, it really focuses on the evolution of digital. What I described to a couple of people, it really is the perfect hybrid between someone that has technical expertise but also marketing expertise. Mm-hmm. And historically, people have sort of sat in either one part or the other. And as time has evolved, it's really been important for those two things to come together.
Yeah. So you bring digital technology to bear in the business world. And in this case, as you raise money for a lot of Christian organizations, we're talking about social media, we're talking about websites, we're talking about online fundraising, all of that. Really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so there are some incredible opportunities that we have to do just that. One of the more exciting ones lately has been with SIM International and helping with their efforts across trying to prevent and decrease the spread of Ebola.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be rewarding to be a part of that. Well, we'll come back to that because I have all kinds of questions. I'm kind of a digital guy myself, and I enjoy all things digital. But so I have some questions about that. But I want to know about you and your life. Where did life start out for you? Tell me about your family growing up.
Well, I was born just north of Naperville here in Waukegan, Illinois, and my mother and my father are both from down south in Memphis, which is where I consider home now. And we lived here and initially came to faith as a part of an effort of my aunt to take us to Sunday school every Sunday.
Yeah, I have a similar story. It was my aunt and uncle who made sure I was in church. So, yeah.
So she drug us to church, and we thoroughly enjoyed it. I actually had a huge affinity for worship at a very young age. And then around 11, we moved down to Memphis, Tennessee. My father relocated there. My mother retired early. She was fairly sick at the time. Mm-hmm. And so we moved down south with more family. And I think around the age of 13, I acknowledged that I had a call to preach and shared that with the local pastor. And I was all set to provide my first sermon, if you will. And we actually took a bit of a detour, and I ended up out of church for several years until I got older.
All right. Well, you're giving me all kinds of threads to follow here.
Yeah.
Let me go back to moving down to the South, or your family returning to the South, and you were a young boy. Life had to be different in the South than it was in Illinois for you.
It was. It was a bit of an adjustment. I recall very vividly being in the 6th grade and sitting across from one of my friends who had to kick me because the assistant principal told me asked me a question, and I said yes. Well, what I didn't realize is in the South, you were required to say, yes, sir.
Oh, okay. All right.
And so that thrust and kick followed a yes, sir. So from then on, it was embedded in my mind that I had to respond with that sort of respect. So it was a different culture, different world.
Yeah.
But certainly, when I look back on it, I'm glad we did.
Did you encounter any racism moving to the South at that time?
Actually, it was quite a bit different. I mean, I actually did not at the time. It wasn't until I got much older, and actually in New York, that I encountered some of the most vivid racism, if you will.
Yeah.
And it's ironic. I mean, most of my friends we lived in a very mixed neighborhood, and it was almost the opposite of what you would expect in the South. We lived actually just north of the Mississippi border.
Yeah. Well, you've had such an interesting life. Okay, now let me take you back to that call to preach when you were young, and then you got away from church altogether.
Yeah.
Tell me about that chapter.
So we left church. We had a pretty bad experience. My mother did, and so it wasn't until I got old enough to drive myself to church that we actually started going. And rightfully so. We had a very bad experience that just pushed us out of the.
Was it church or was it the Lord? I mean, what did you make a distinction there?
Believe it was church.
It was church.
Do not believe it was the Lord.
Yeah,
I believe it was
you didn't walk away from Him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and we still had, we had incredible. My mother's a huge person of faith, and we had incredible, times of worship in home on a Saturday morning, cleaning.
Mom's had a way of doing that. Okay.
Yeah. But as far as organized religion and going to church, it was something that I considered to be a real big detour and distraction.
Okay. So eventually, though, you started preaching.
Yeah. It was several years later that I just started realizing the call. And became stronger and stronger and stronger. And I think about by age 20, I really realized, I'm going too far. I've lived too long. It's time to start really exploring what God has called me to do. Mm-hmm. So I started in youth ministry, just volunteering at local community churches. One was located in a apartment facility in Memphis, Tennessee, and noticed just the ability to help people with the message of Christ and transform their lives and give them some measure of hope was something that would be a part of my life for the rest of my life.
Do you remember preaching for the first time?
I do. It was incredible.
I don't think anybody ever forgets that experience, do they?
It was an incredible opportunity. And later on, I would end up teaching preachers, and I call upon that experience, the first experience of preaching, of really being all over the place, of having a message. And it's one of the things I know that every preacher can resonate with is after years and years and years of study and having that opportunity, you almost have too much to say.
Yeah, right.
And really the art of preaching is really distilling down a couple of key messages and points that people can take away, giving them enough to digest.
I often hear preachers reflect back on that first message and thought they had 60 minutes of material, and it turned out to be 10. Was it like that for you?
For me, it was the exact opposite. I spent so much time in study and so much time in preparation and so many years really not in front of the mic. I mean, I answered and acknowledged my call at a very young age, but it wasn't until 7 or 8 years that I actually had the opportunity to commit myself to that call.
So did you receive training yourself?
I did. And
seminary or college?
I did. Initially, it wasn't seminaries. Initially, the greatest experience that I had as my preparation for preaching was actually in college. I majored in philosophy at Rhodes College, a real great school in the South in Memphis, Tennessee. And I found myself over and over again having to debate what I believed with a great group of atheists and people who found themselves, contesting everything that I would say, and with strong refutation. And that was my training ground, and actually a perfect segue for me into a discipline of really grabbing the word and understanding it, and also being able to share with other people.
We started out talking about your life as a digital officer in a corporation, but you still preach, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have your own church?
So I co-pastor with my best friend who's a medical doctor. We split duties.
Is that right?
And so
what's the name of the church?
It's called The Way Church of Memphis.
All right.
And and coincidentally or providentially, however you look at it, we've been in ministry together for almost 12 years in different places, in different cities.
That's got to be one of the most unique churches in the community or anywhere, to have a medical doctor and a digital, officer, expert pastors of the church.
Yeah, a really great dynamic. I mean, one of the great things that we're able to do is mentor a lot of other young adults and give them some advice, not only spiritual, but also for their careers.
Yeah, talk about that for a moment. I would imagine that'd be a powerful example to them.
It is. I think for all too long, especially in our community, there's a focus really just on the spiritual and not the natural, which, the natural includes career development and where you're investing your money and how you're spending your time, what you're majoring in. Really, that's an aspect of our ministry, I think, that makes it especially unique.
Yeah.
And we have a number of people who sort of gravitate to us on the basis of not first the spiritual, but actually the natural. To say you guys are successful in your natural life, and we'd love to seek a mentorship and help in that regard.
I know that doesn't happen in the predominantly white church. Does that happen much in the predominantly black church?
Not as much. Not as much.
Yeah.
And again, going back to the discipline of study, it's a very different, I think, career trajectory where we are, I think, atypical in our community, where there are a lot of pastors who are solely focused on their career as pastors, and not really focused or have any sort of tentacles into what some people might consider the secular or the real world.
There's more to Shane Norman's story, and you'll hear it coming up in the second half of today's conversation on First Person. First Person has partnered with Mission Aviation Fellowship to make available to you a free copy of the classic book Jungle Pilot, telling the life story of early missionary aviation pilot Nate Saint and the pioneering work of MAF. I've narrated this special audio edition of Jungle Pilot, and a free download is available at firstpersoninterview.com. Your whole family will enjoy listening to Jungle Pilot. To download, visit firstpersoninterview.com. My guest today is Shane Norman. Shane and I rub elbows once in a while in an office called Douglas Shaw & Associates in the suburban Chicago area. Doug is walking by the office right now, as a matter of fact, outside the studio waving at us, Shane. My studio is here inside these offices, and you live in Memphis, but this is the home office for you.
Absolutely.
But we've never had a chance to sit down and talk before, and I really appreciate this opportunity. Now, in a sense, I guess you're a bivocational pastor, aren't you?
Yeah.
I mean, you work in the digital realm, and I want to talk more about that. But as a pastor, I mean, how do you divide your time? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a delicate balance. I mean, I think one of the greatest talents in the world. I'm also a father and a husband, and have 3 demanding kids.
Okay, I should have asked you about that part of your life.
Yeah. And so I think one of the greatest gifts that God can give us is that proper balance, is to give enough to what He's called us to do and what He's given us, and really to be good stewards over what we've been assigned. And I work incredibly hard and incredibly long hours, and that's really the only way that it works.
But you don't short your family.
No, not at all. In fact, they don't allow me to.
Your ministry is your family, right?
Yeah, they don't allow me to. Yeah. So my kids are I think, preconditioned to demand the time to climb on top of my computer or on top of my neck, and demand the time that they're given.
Tell me about your wife and the ages of your kids.
So I've got 3 kids, 3, 7, and 11.
Okay, let's pray.
Yes, daily.
And your wife?
So we actually grew up around each other. She's a couple years younger than me, but we went to the same elementary school, and we actually had a number of the same friends, and met 3 different times through 3 different mutual friends. The first time she gave me a fake number, and the second time she ended up actually in a Bible study that I was teaching. And that's actually how we established a relationship.
All right. Shane, we talk a lot on First Person about calling, and this has to be something that you've wrestled with and seem to be handling well. I mean, what are your thoughts about how God calls and equips people?
Yeah, I think that He equips us and He calls us specifically to our talents and the gifts that He's given us. I would say often I think we lie to kids and tell them you can be whatever you want to be when you grow up. And I really believe you can be whatever you want to be within the confines of the gifts that God has given you. Mm-hmm. And to me, I believe the greatest responsibility we have is to maximize what He's given us. Mm-hmm. And for me, I find comfort in knowing that I can exercise my gifts in multiple avenues and ways, and not be limited to one channel or the other.
Yeah.
I consider my job to be ministry, if you will, mm-hmm. and consider the opportunities that I'm given to be areas where I can exercise the gifts that God has trusted me with.
Yeah, there is no line between work and ministry, is there?
No, there's not. I think you're always on, mm-hmm. and we're always a reflection of Him. Mm-hmm. And I consider opportunities like speaking in front of a group of chief digital officers an opportunity to minister.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't think most kids growing up, though, think to themselves, I want to become a chief digital officer someday. So how did this all start for you?
It was really accidental. So it was accidental and it was providential.
It was God's accident. Right?
Yeah. And I consider, just again going back to the idea that we can be whatever we want to be. I wanted to be a lawyer. And I failed miserably in mock trial competition in high school, and said, okay, maybe I'm not good at that. And what ended up happening really just as a result of taking on jobs and opportunities, I discovered a real knack for marketing, started working for newspapers as an account executive. I graduated actually straight out of college, started working for the NBC affiliate in Memphis, and ended up having a significant amount of success initially for my first year and a half. And something I don't think is I ended up leaving my job. It was a commission sales job, and as it would happen, I did very, very well my first year and a half. The next several months, I saw a huge decline in sales, and there's an interesting way that sales works where you get paid up front, and if the clients don't pay their bills, they take the money back. So at about the end of 2003, I went from making $6,000 or $7,000 a month, which is huge for a college kid.
Sure.
To early 2004, bringing home $1,300.
Yeah.
And I found myself really in a very precarious position where I said, either I can try to dig myself out of this hole, or I just need to go and do something different. And I decided to go and do something different. And when that was actually to quit my job, and everybody thought I was crazy. I quit my job, gave up the little fun little Beamer I had and condo. And went and served as a missionary in the Dominican Republic.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
How long?
For about the period of 6 months.
Okay.
And the initial.
Well, let me stop you because I mean the whole idea of in a sense failing at that sales job that way, and that must have been devastating, especially for a young person who's starting out like that. But as you look back on it, I mean, it was a transition point for you.
As I look back on it, was the absolute best thing I could have ever done in my life.
People say that, and I've experienced some of that too.
Yeah. And everybody's perception on the outside was that I was crazy. I did have one person who didn't think I was crazy, and that's my best friend, the medical doctor I told you about,
okay.
who offered some confirmation and some comforting words ahead of my journey. And gradually over time, people understood.
Okay.
But at the time, I felt alone, and I had to sense and hear the voice of God, and I did, and it was really a life transforming experience.
You said it lasted 6 months.
Yes.
Did you hear the voice of God say, "This is over. This is another thing I have for you now"?
I did. I thought it was going to be there a year. Towards the end of the year, there were some things happening back home. My mother was getting sick again.
God uses circumstances, doesn't He?
It does. And I tell everybody it's like being when you trust Him completely, it's like being a leaf in the wind. Yeah, you reduce your density and you just go with the flow.
Yeah.
And so since the timing it was time for me to come back home. I was there long enough. I got very, very sick. I lost a lot of weight. I couldn't eat the food that was there. I already wasn't that big. Lost about 15 pounds.
Wow.
But I had a fervent, just a really, really strong sense of God's presence there. And one of the greatest things that happened for me is I ran out of money. And here I am, this American who people perceive to have money and be well funded, and God knew I didn't have any money or any food, and I had people just walk up to me randomly at services and just hand bags of coins, bags of money, and times like that just really showed me, God's hand on my life and His awareness of me and my condition, and it provided such a great sense of who I am in Him.
Yeah. So all of this is preparation, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we need to look at that even when we're going through it. It's hard to see it at the time, but it's all preparation for something greater that He has for us.
Absolutely.
You've experienced that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the transition then from being a missionary to what?
Yeah, so then being a missionary, I preached and I taught there, and I left, and I came back really with nothing, and went to go back and work for the TV stations. None of them would have me, so I ended up reconnecting with one of my old clients. His name is Dr. Toyos, and he was spending a bunch of money and really not well. And I ended up starting my own agency with him. He ended up becoming Inc. 500 fastest growing company in 2005, largely due to some of the stuff that we had outlined and done during my time at the NBC affiliate and bringing him to TV for the first time.
So you worked with some very major companies, didn't you?
Yeah. So I basically landed in my own company and made a big name for myself pretty quickly, and established a career. And from there, I established relationships with all the local TV stations, and Fox recruited me to come and work for them to run the internet division in Memphis for their stations.
Well, this whole digital revolution has come about so quickly in the last generation. I mean, you had to grow up with it.
Yeah.
So is it like a second language to you?
It is. I mean, it's I think even more so for people that are slightly younger than me. They're born digitally native. The disruption really sort of happened midstream during my career. When I started at NBC, it was really a non-issue. And when I took over the internet division for Fox in Memphis and then promoted to New York, it was the center of what's happening in the world, and really brought a bunch of fear and as well as opportunity, which is where I was able to make my career.
All right. Well, we've covered a lot of territory very quickly here, and I know there's a whole lot more. But as we draw the conversation to a close, Shane, I just want to ask you, what's the bottom line so far? I mean, you're a young man. Who knows what God has in store for you? But what's the bottom line so far? What's the lesson learned? And what would you share with other people who are looking themselves for God's will for their life?
Well, I think the greatest opportunity is to take every single piece of life, every moment, and to make it as special as it possibly can be, to maximize the opportunity. I came up with a quote a couple days ago. I don't know how original it is, but I discovered this with my kids in the store. We were, because of how busy I am, I make everyday events something special.
So when you go shopping with the kids?
So we just go shopping. Hey, let's hop in the car and let's do something. So my oldest child went through Walmart and she was just grabbing stuff and said, "Ooh, look at this. Ooh, look at that. Ooh, look at that." And what I discovered, I came home and I told my wife, I said, the key to happiness is finding something extra in the ordinary so that everything becomes extraordinary.
I'm glad we had the chance to bring you today's guest, Shane Norman, with his unique gifting and story to tell. There are people like Shane strategically placed throughout the kingdom of God to help advance the cause of Christ in this world. When you visit our website, you'll have a chance to learn more about Shane and the company he works for, Douglas Shaw. In addition to that, there's an audio archive so you can listen again or share the audio link with someone else you think might like to hear what you've heard today. Just go to firstpersoninterview.com. That's firstpersoninterview.com, where you'll also find a schedule of what's coming up in the weeks ahead as we close out one year and begin another. Also, don't forget you can download a free audiobook from Mission Aviation Fellowship called Jungle Pilot, telling the life story of martyred MAF pilot Nate Saint. Just go to firstpersoninterview.com and click on the Jungle Pilot banner. That's firstpersoninterview.com. Next week, the president of Prison Fellowship, Jim Liskey, will be here. Now, with thanks to my friend and producer Joe Carlson, I'm Wayne Shepherd, inviting you back next time for First Person.